All right, we are live on Can We Have a Conversation? Today I am your host, Dr. P. I have a very distinguished guest with us today. Many times you all hear me speak about fatherhood. You hear my story, you hear my journey about the work that I do. But I have a gentleman that's on here today that's been doing it way before I've been doing it. He's really actually one of the trailblazers as it pertains to fatherhood. And I met him in Nashville, Tennessee. They had some expert practitioners fly down and to talk about implementing a program. And so during this time, I said, I want to interview Dr. Jeffrey Johnson. And so,
Mhm.
Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, thank you for being a guest today. And I know we have a lot to talk about. We talked about some things online,
Mhm.
and we're going to be talking about some things well, we talked about some things offline, and we're going to be talking about some things online. So,
Okay.
if you could you just share something about yourself and the work in the responsible fatherhood field?
Well, thank you, Dr. P, and hello to your listening audience from around the world. Uh, well, my name is Jeffrey Johnson. I come from the Detroit area. I come from a family of 10 children, including 8 boys. My father was a minister, pastor of a church, and so I'm a PK. Uh, uh, my father died, when I was 12 years of age, and so for most of my life, after that, I have the experience of living in a two-parent household, and I also have the experience of living in a single-parent, mother-led household. The thing I learned about, fatherhood and motherhood was respect that my father and my mother had for one another. You know, my mother lived to 94, and I never heard her utter a negative word about my father. That was inspiration to me in the sense that if I could live my life and be the man and the father that my mother saw in my dad, I'd be, doing okay. And I can tell you right now, I'm still trying to live up to the standard that he set. Uh, and that was an important lesson too for me, because what it brings to the work is one of the real critical relationship challenges that some of our fathers and mothers have, and that is how not to call each other out in front of the children when things are not going well. Do you know that I never saw my mother and father argue? Right? And I know they did, but they never did it in front of the kids. And maybe that was because of his background, and that's because you do nothing to raise your children to ire or to make them angry. And so my parents followed that model, to very directly. I guess the other thing I would like to say is that I was one of those kids who were in those public programs that came out of the Great Society, and I had abilities, but I had the need to be connected, to other systems and things, and so those programs really helped me, and eventually, I was able to build on that and go to University of Michigan. I went to undergraduate school there and got both my master's and PhD there when I was 26 years old. You know what I mean?
Oh,
And so I've
wow.
been out here, working, with the pressure of being a PhD since 26. You know what I mean? And that's a lot of pressure. Trust me, because people expect you to know a whole lot, even though you don't. But anyway, I'm at the point of synergy right now. I think I'm connecting with what I need to know with the qualifications to be able to make some statements about some things, particularly fatherhood, that I've been doing. I got involved in fatherhood work in 1990, working with a group called Public-Private Ventures. It was one of the very first demonstration projects funded by foundations in the U.S. government. It was called the Young Unwed Fathers Pilot Project, and I wrote the curriculum for the project. And that curriculum that I wrote back in 1990 is still in use today.
Mm.
And then from that point on, I wrote curriculums for other demonstration projects focused on, I might add, low-income men who were unmarried, who were low-skilled, and many of whom had not established legal paternity as dad. And so that's kind of the track I've been on. Back in 1996, I was asked to establish a nonprofit organization, which is called the National Partnership for Community Leadership, to administer a Ford Foundation program called Partners for Fragile Families, which involved 10 cities nationwide, including LA, in California. I know, Dr. P, you're in Oakland. We did a lot of work in Oakland. But suffice to say that that demonstration project was sought to work with fathers and mothers who weren't married, who were poor, and had not essentially established paternity, but they were still in relationship. There was still some romance there, and it was in 10 cities across the country. And then from that, we got another demonstration project working on the Fathers at Work initiative. And so the importance of these things that I'm saying, because along the way, when the private foundation community started what I called in finance, the community-based fatherhood movement, the whole basis of it was building the evidence to be able to take the case to Congress to say that this is a taxpayer issue. Right now, these families are tax burdens. And what we're trying to do is make them taxpayers. But in order to do that, you got to work with these mothers and fathers, bring them to the point where they could be the best parents that they could be under their circumstances, which would then eliminate a generational curse, if you will, that is passed on and passed on and passed on, in ways that are really destructive to our kids. Because really, people talk about the prison pipeline. It doesn't start in the third grade. It starts when you're in the home, and that home is dysfunctional. You know what I mean? And what I mean by dysfunctional, the child is not supervised. And listen, I love the parents. If you love the kids, you gotta love the parents. And I really am trying to work with the parents, in a spirit of love and respect, and to really help them rethink, where they want to go with their lives. Who are they now as mothers and fathers in their life? Where do they want to go? What's their vision for themselves as mothers and fathers? And what is their plan? What is their one-man plan in order to be the best father he can be? And really draw that out of them and then help them get there, with the supports and things that we do. And so that work really led to the first public financing of fatherhood program as part of our TANF program back in 2005 as part of the Deficit Reduction Act. And so there's a steady state of federal funding going in for programs around the country, but it's not a national program. What do I mean by that? Well, it's not in every state. And that since 2005, every state, since it's a competitive program, so every state has not received a federal grant to do fatherhood, right? And a lot of times when the Fed does that, the states join in. But you have half of the states that have never even applied for the federal, fatherhood grants. And so while it's a resource, it's not a resource that reaches all the communities in every state where there's a need to work with fathers, so that in an effort to reduce the high level of father absence and formal presence in the life of their children. Because a lot of these fathers, these mothers, without intervention, they really, go their separate ways. And a lot of times the children fall into, depression, traumatic situations, and the parents may have had that too, because the reality is that, these things are generational. That came out in the research of Vivian Gaston some years ago. And one of the core learnings that she talked about in core learning 7 was how much generational influence has over the behavior, and that young people, when they become parents, they don't realize that they have children, but they've not reached the maturational status to really perform the duties of fathers and mothers that's going to help their children continue to grow. And again, that's something that, I blame all of us as a society for letting that happen. I'm not going to blame them. All right? I'm not going to blame them. What I'm going to do is try to provide the type of education and support they need to be the best parents they can be on their circumstances in an effort to break the cycle. That's what we got to break the cycle. And I think we break the cycle through education. We do it through having support systems. And in some cases, it requires helping men get jobs and pay a family-sustaining wage so they can make different choices about family planning and family formation.
I said a lot. No, that's good. That's good because you lay in the foundation. A lot of times, I go right in and I talk about, the importance of fatherhood. I talk about, how, a father's absence impacts not only a family, but impacts a community and our society. But they don't hear this side of the story. They don't hear how it was implemented, how it started. And we were talking about some of those things offline about you and some of the giants that
Mhm.
really actually paved the road as it pertains to fatherhood. And so I wanted to ask you, because I was reading in your book, and the book is The Cornerstone for Responsible Fatherhood. And I was reading in there, and it says that and correct me if I'm not right, but it said that you wrote I guess a bill or something for the
Yeah,
first.
the first, it was called the Father's Counts Bill, and it was back, in the late 1990s. It was an evolution of a set of bills that were proposed by the late Julia Carson. And it was a woman in Congress who really stepped out there in Congress. They got the ball rolling around, federal legislation to support fathers. Now, when administration changed, you talk about Democrats, Republicans, you should know that fatherhood has always been a bipartisan issue,
Mm-hmm.
but it really did take George W., to really put money behind or in the renewal of TANF. TANF renews every 5 years. All
Mm-hmm.
right. So when George Bush got in office in 2000, after Clinton, it took him 5 years to actually get it in the renewal of TANF, which is part of the Federal Deficit Reduction Act of 2005 that included both healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood. But the precursor to that was the Father's Counts Bill, and I was one of the principals in that, and was addressing Congress and moving in that direction. And I also add, I was the person. I was one of two people. I was with Ron Haskins, who was then the staff director, for the majority of the House, was a Republican at the time, and later went to the Brookings Foundation, and he would and I, when Congress passed it, overwhelmingly, we were the ones, the first ones on Capitol Hill to say that the fatherhood bill had passed. I mean, that was the Father's Counts bill. All right, but see, in Washington, Congress proposes legislation and bills, but the Senate has to finance it. All right. And even though it passed in the House, it didn't get the financing until 2005. And so
Mm.
that's the
Oh,
history of that.
wow.
Right. See, there, I was right there. In my work in the fatherhood field, and I think you get it out of the book, if I wasn't doing it, I was in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I wasn't doing it directly myself, I was in the room, right? And as I look back on it, that those are some valuable lessons, because people don't know, really that the real giant, that get often overlooked in some of the general statements about the fatherhood movement is the guy who really got it all started, and that was a guy named Dr. Charles Ballard.
Mm-hmm.
Ballard was doing. He was the first one to start doing community-based fatherhood work back in 1978.
Wow.
And our history at the community-based level comes out of the health community, because Charles was working for Cleveland Clinic, and he was working with mothers. He was a social worker on infant mortality reduction.
Mm-hmm.
And what would happen is that the mothers would come in, and Charles would work with them, one on one, sometimes in groups, and then he would always see these guys hanging out of the hospital, waiting for him, and he would ask them, women, he began to ask them, who are they? They said, that's my baby daddy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then Ballard, instinctively asked those guys to start coming in, and then he started talking with them and start formulating ideas for a program, and then went to the Cleveland Foundation and was able to get the first funding for community-based fatherhood in Cleveland, Ohio. And what made Ballard different is that I'm going to say, in a very loving way, he was ruthless. All right. In other words, he was a guy who had the passion, had the idea for how to do this work. He ended up in the New York Times front page. He ended up on 60 Minutes. He ended up on Oprah. And I can tell you, nobody was doing that, black, brown, red, or yellow, but
Mm-hmm.
Charles Ballard. All right. And I said in the book, a bit, I talk about Ballard, and Ballard had a real kind of a Messianic view of his role in the fatherhood work, right? And that's good for the passion.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, when you can have that type of disposition, you don't think that anybody else sees what you see. It's like somebody saying that, I can talk to God, but nobody, and I can hear God, but nobody else can. You know what I mean? Look,
Yeah,
you pray, you follow me,
right.
and when you start trying to grow and to go to scale, you can't do it by yourself. All right,
That's right.
you need people. You may be the smartest in the room, but you can't do it all by yourself because you may not be the smartest in the room. But that's not to take away from the idea itself and the passion. For example, he started the whole family-based intervention of going into families' homes, talking about fatherhood. He started that. He was the first one who came up with the name 24/7 because he had all of his
Mm.
staff people have beepers. Way back he had beepers, and he trained his staff. He said, "Your job, and you'll get off. You work 4 days a week. You get off, but for the 4 days, I want you to be available to these families 24/7." And what he would actually do, he was also the founder in some of the marriage movement because what he
Mm-hmm.
would do, he would only hire married couples, and what he would
Yeah, I
do is
saw that. I read that. Yeah.
he placed them in public housing complexes, right? And their job was to go in, become part of the community, learn what was going on, get to talk to the moms, and find out if dad was hiding out, with some of those Section 8 houses, and to let them know that he had a program that was going to work with them so they can really come above ground and not have to be underground. And those are lessons of recruitment. Those are lessons of how do you really the benefit of really working with families inside their homes. It's a lesson in the passion. Let me tell you what I learned from Charles. I'll never forget it. It was very important when he said it. He said when a father is absent from the home, he said the first thing you should assume is that he wants to be there first.
Wow.
He said you start there. All right. So if you start from the premise that he wants to be there, then you ask yourself the question, if he's not there, what are the barriers that are precluding him from being there? And if you think about that, that is a total different take on how to deal with it. So instead of trying to approach it from a deficit model, that he's there, he don't want to be there, he was a wham bam, thank you ma'am, that type of thing. No, because what and you know this doing the fatherhood work, most of those fathers who you work with are fathers who do want to be in the life of their children.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But along the way, they've had some relational challenges, they've had some employment challenges, they may have had some contact with the criminal justice system, and those things, they may have a substance abuse problem, and those things become the barriers that have precluded him from being the father he wants to be to his children. And Ballard said that when he's not there, assume that he wants to be there first. And
Mm-hmm.
then once you start there, then what you're talking about is how can we overcome those barriers, right? One by one, it will then put him in the situation that he wants to be in.
I read about a thing, speaking about him going to a high school, and it was a
Mm-hmm.
group of men in the high school, and he asked them how many of them were fathers,
Right.
and it's like 3 people raised their hand, and
Right.
then he said, that's strange because he knew it was more than that in the room,
Right.
and especially in that environment, in that community.
That's right.
And then he turned around and rephrased the question and
Yeah.
said, how many of you have kids?
That's right.
And more than half of the people, 3/4 of the people raised their hand, and they had the unction to make the distinction between a father and having kids.
That's right. And that's so important to understand because, you know, there's a cultural element to this. You know what I mean? And part of it is who's the father, who's the baby daddy, who's daddy,
Mhm.
right? Daddy at the other end of the spectrum is a term of endearment. All right,
Mhm.
because every father don't get to be called daddy for whatever reason. He's always a father, but he's not always daddy. You know
That's
what I mean?
right.
Which is a name given to fathers who earn that title. All right. And so you got that element of it, and it's just understanding, that Ballard, when he was doing, he was going, he was recruiting fathers, by playing midnight basketball. All
Mm-hmm.
right, we should be
Mm-hmm.
doing some of that right now. So
That's
Ballard
right.
was doing, he's going where folks are, and then he would go and he was a guy who it was a softball, and he could play basketball pretty good. And so after the games, when he would ask them, who they were, he would ask those questions,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
then began to tell them about his program, and a lot of guys would show up in the beginning. Ballard ran a pretty tight ship, you know what I mean, because he really was predisposed to guys who were either married or wanted to marry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that was his constitution, you know what I mean. You got to respect that, you know what I mean. That's what he was doing, you know what I mean. But he was able to do it, and my job when I got to the Ford Foundation, my very first assignment was to work with Ford to try to determine the investment of Ford into Charles Ballard. That's why I know so much about him, and he and I became great friends. At our conference, we've given 25, had 25 conferences over the last 25 years, the longest running fatherhood conference in the United States, and our Pioneer Award is named after him. All right,
Oh wow.
and it's for a purpose. It's because when you ever see a name like that on a trophy or a plaque or anything like that, it's a reminder, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't forget him. We can't forget him, and that even though he did what he could for the time, and
Mm-hmm.
so but he laid the foundation for guys like you and I to build on what he had started, and it's not and that and hopefully what we learn from him is by his lack of desire to be a partner is the significance of being a partner. And
Mm.
because he was born of that period, where you held on to what you had, and that if you had the ability to attract these folks to you, the 60 Minutes, the Oprahs, and everybody else, the reality, it's like it's difficult to share that. You shouldn't be. It shouldn't be difficult to share. That's why I ended up in the book talking about leadership. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? And leadership, is first of all, if you don't have any followers, you're not leading, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the very definition of leadership: followership. You want to know what leadership is? How many people follow? Now,
Mm-hmm.
that's a value system issue too, because we've had leaders whose values I don't share. You know what I mean? And I don't need to mention any of those. You can just imagine who some of those folks are. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, for those of us who stay in it and want to advance the work, particularly at the programmatic level, we have to understand the importance of leadership and having community partnerships and being able to get the community to co-own what you're doing, because that's going to be the impetus you need to get legislators and others, businesses and others to support what you're trying to do, as opposed to thinking that you can do it as a solo act. You know what I mean? There's
Let
no
me ask.
solo act in
Let
this.
me let me ask you a question. I didn't mean to cut you off,
Go ahead,
but
sir.
my wife had asked the question. She says, why is it that they only have funding for fatherhood every 5 years? And
I'm glad you said that. I got it.
okay,
Mhm.
and
Go
then
ahead.
she said because I've been searching, looking for, you know, funding for fatherhood, and they just have it for families, but wives and children, but not fathers. So I know the answer to that. I
Right.
couldn't give her the answer.
Right. Well, first of all, the reason why you got the programs for mothers and children, because that's the history. All right.
Mhm.
In other words, social welfare programs, maternal and child health programs are built on the premise of working with mothers and children. Again, you got to follow the social welfare inauguration of this work. And when it was established, the policies, the issue led to the policies, was that the notion was that the father was dead,
Mhm.
right? So you don't
Mhm.
program for him because he's dead. He didn't come back home from war.
Mhm.
You follow me? That was the whole premise of it, and that's what it was set up for, to work with widows, in particular white widows with children, so the
Mhm.
children would not have to be put up for adoption.
Mhm.
That was what the whole Aid to Dependent Children program was about, and that was what that's the social welfare program history. So that's that answer, okay? And it still remains there because a lot of our policies, whenever you work with families, is still entangled in this historic way in which it was designed in the first place, and depending on who you have in the policymaking positions, including our legislators, they would rather maintain that approach as opposed to change it. And that's when people like you and I come in and say, hey, you got to change this stuff. It ain't working because he ain't dead. He's still around.
Right.
You need a hand up. You don't need a hand out. You need a hand up. All right.
I talked to an attorney today that was working close with our mayor, and I was telling him that it's very important that he set up a meeting that I can speak with the governor, not the mayor, the governor.
Right. Yes.
I said, because there's a lot of laws and legislation and policies that need to be changed. I mean, we're living in a 1950 antiquated system that needs to be changed. And I looked at something that you had in your book that really made me think. It talked about that we are starting 100, fathers are starting 150 years behind.
Yeah. Right.
you
right.
know?
Right. Because in part of think about it, women's suffrage. It has always been the view that men have the responsibility to not only do it, but to do it themselves. You know what I mean? And be the breadwinner, and to be in the early stages of the fatherhood work. Going back to the Industrial Revolution, the primary definition of a father was a provider. For example, up until about 1950, 55, if there was a divorce and there was a custody issue, the child would always go to the dad because the dad had the resources. All right. And it's only when that began to change in the family court system, really in the 60s, that began to really differentiate, and some of that was influenced by, Sigmund Freud's, view, in saying that children need to be with their moms more than their dads, and so, but that's been blown out of the water so many times, over the last 20 some odd years that folks don't even think that way. But that's kind of where our system, evolved from. In the
You'll be surprised. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Right. The reason why it's 5 years, remember, the federal funding is a part of TANF. TANF, it used to be Aid to Dependent Children. It renews every 5 years. That's the history of it. And the fatherhood money is tied to TANF. It's part of TANF. All right. And so that's the cycle, and that's unfortunate for several reasons. One, they may have funded programs that really they shouldn't fund over 5 years because they're not doing what they're supposed to do. That's an important piece. The other part of it is that when you do that, you don't bring folks in who may have better ideas. This takes too long, right? It takes too long. You know what I mean? It's like, I think the funding cycles probably need to be maybe 3 years, but definitely not 5, because it keeps good programs out of the cycle. All right. And it's part of the policy, because when it comes over to like groups like the Administration for Children and Families or Departments of Human Services in certain states, it's already designated for that period of time. All right. And so, and then another part of it, which I also think is part of it, is that it's easier to manage when you do it over 5 years than doing it every 3 years. And that's unfortunate too, because we got an emergency out here, Dr. P.
Yes, sir. Yes,
an
sir.
emergency out here. You know what I mean? It's like, look, make this stuff work.
You got to wait 5 years for the next time.
But see, that's all the more reason why when you think about funding, we got to diversify it. It can't always be from the public trough. We got to entice the business community to want to invest in this as well. I have a friend of mine. I went over to Oxford University with a group of folks from around the world to talk about fatherhood some years ago as part of the International Year of the Family. And we were at Oxford University coming together, just like we did there in Nashville, for the purpose of putting language in the UN Charter that basically said that fathers are important to families. All right. And so I met this guy named Graham Russell out of Australia, and he has fatherhood programs, but all of his program funding comes from corporations because he's tied fatherhood to the quality of work life. All right. And companies have bought into it.
Wow, that's a good way. That's a good, yeah.
That is part of a human resource function, because if he has a happy home, you're gonna have a happy worker. If he's a happy worker, he's gonna be a productive worker. And if it's a productive worker, you're gonna be making money. And if you're making money, all is good.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. And we really do have to move in those directions. We need to try to get the federal policies changed. What I'd like to see, for example, I'd like to see all the states have a formula grant from with that money that they have, to make it available to every state, so that at least every state has a fatherhood program. And those progressive states like Tennessee that we just came from, you will have folks like that who say that I'm getting this money from the feds. I can match that money with the money I have and do something more of scale, right? But right now, there's a small federal program. If you heard from the OFA director that was there, he said they had a couple programs in Tennessee, but small scale. But see, to me, what they should have been doing before they funded those projects, they should have had some conversation with the state to see, or had somebody or somebody could talk to the state to see how those things could be joined together in such a way to offer the resource to more folks, in periods of times that make sense, for allowing the greatest innovation and all those other type of things to occur. And so, but unless the advocacy community challenges that, through legislation, it's going to continue to be that way, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, we definitely have to change that. I love the way that Commissioner Clarence Carter, how he,
Yes.
He didn't just take money and throw it out there and just say,
No.
we're going to do this. He said,
Right.
we're going to bring some experts
Right.
around the country,
Right.
some fatherhood programs that are experienced, that have been through the ups and the downs.
Right.
And let's see how we can brainstorm and implement a program of substance.
That's right. Right. And that's a beautiful thing, but see, we need more of that, but again, this is not a solo act. It's not a solo act by any individual practitioner. It's not a solo act when it comes to the different departments. Because the question I asked the OFA director, the head of the Office of Family Assistance, I asked him the first night, I said, when's the last time you visited your counterpart at the Labor Department?
And I remember that.
He said no. You know what I mean?
I remember that.
And the reason why I can ask him that, because I know him, right? I've been knowing him for many years before he became what he is. I've been in Washington since Ronald Reagan days. You know what I mean? So I've seen all these folks. So I know them. You know what I mean? They know me. And so I could ask him that question. Would you believe today, just to give you an idea of that connection I have with him, would you believe earlier today, he sent me an email, and he said, it was good seeing you in Nashville. I wanted to contact you to make sure that I knew the dates of your conference, because we want to have a conference, from OFA, and we don't want to compete with yours.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's good.
That was the day. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's our relationship, because a couple years ago, when they started the thing, they had it doing the same. We've been having our conference for 25 years, same time of the month in June, always the week before Father's Day week. And the reason why we do it that way is because a lot of the fatherhood programs, and practitioners, they have their own fatherhood programs the week of Fatherhood Day week.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that the conference is not competing with that. But see, you know that because you learn that because folks tell you this is what works best for them. And so, but anyway, he called me today. All right, the top, Bush administration official sent me an email today. I want to know when your conference is so that we won't do ours, so we have to compete. And I said, yeah, that's a good idea, because I want to invite you to participate in our conference. You know
there
what I
you
mean?
go. There you go.
And so you follow me? But see, that's partnership.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's how we do this. You know what I mean? And I was so appreciative that he was thoughtful enough, to do that. He didn't have to do that, because listen,
he could have just went ahead and did it.
He got a lot more resources than I got. I mean, I can't. You see what I'm saying? He can listen. He can buy out the Grand Ole Opry. I can't buy out the Grand Ole Opry. I got to charge you a registration fee. He can do his for free. All right, I can't do it for free. You know what I mean? But but anyway, that's that's the nature of the business. And there is a business of fatherhood. I had the extraordinary opportunity to be the national chair for the 100th anniversary of Father's Day in America. And we had a big, celebration of that and rally at the Lincoln Memorial. And President Obama at the time didn't attend, but he made his first video in support of fatherhood as part of the 100th anniversary, and his administration also paid for the jumbotrons to make sure that everybody who was there could see President Obama in support of fatherhood. So we've just had a lot of opportunities to be, there, and I'm one of those guys who believe that these things happen for a purpose, and it all goes back to my own dad. Unlike a lot of my peers in the work, I knew my dad for 12 years, and he was a good dad. You know what I mean? And I was not wounded by my father. You know what I mean? And what I'm trying, and I know that men have the capacity, who become fathers, to be good fathers. And I learned that from my dad, and that's the motivation that I have in sharing this information, because it all goes back to, when I think about the book is about the future of children. All right. And the future of children is rooted in the life of their parents, as the first teachers. And so we really do have an understanding that there's a parent missing oftentimes for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's policy, sometimes it's some other barrier, but we have significant father absence, even though off the record, you have a lot more Black fathers doing fatherhood work than any other fathers group. And that's been
right.
supported by CDC and others. All right.
I got it. Yeah, I quote it all the time.
Right. And it's about capacity building, because when we do the work, we have to understand that this is education work, right? It's education. Why would I say that? Because if you're going to take fathers to a program that impart knowledge to them, and you keep them in there 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, that's like a semester of class, right? And it is education. Why is education so important? Education is not experience, but what education does, it gives you insight into experience. So people like you and I can impart that information, and it lets people know what their options are, all right? In a decent way, not necessarily in a street way, even though there's sometimes the street way is good, but more often than not, the decent way is better, all right? But we have to build the capacity of agencies. And so the commitment of the National Partnership for Community Leadership, we came into business, our job was for the express purpose of helping build the capacity of community-based agencies to work with fathers in a way that would connect him to his child over the long haul. Ballard's refrain, was based on a scripture in the Bible. I think it's Malachi 4:6, and it says that if the father's heart is not connected to the child, and the child's heart is not connected to the father, then God will come back and curse the land.
That's
all right.
That's the word.
So, right. And so, right. I mean? And so later translations say parents, but that's why I say it's grounded in the parents. And then what we want to do is build the evidence. All right. Everything time we do work, I don't care how small it is, we're building evidence. All right. But we got to document it as such. We got to have good records. We got to, if we don't have computer, we got to do good record keeping, because all those things help build your capacity, because what you're trying to do is to present yourself in such a way that someone wants to invest in you. All right. And not only one source, but multiple sources. Why is that important? Because you want to be around as long as some of our faith-based institutions that have been around since 1805. All right. You got to sustain yourself, because when you sustain yourself over time, people realize what you are, what your value is all about, and people will work with you to keep you, in business. And that's a work that we still have to do in the fatherhood field, and that's what I'm committed to. And I know you, Dr. P, are committed to the same thing. And I just appreciate this program, because these are lessons that are not only for the United States, but these were lessons that we've been talking about, for years. And I've worked in Europe. I've worked in the Caribbean. I've worked in Africa around these issues. And even though there may be some structural differences in terms of how our governments are set up and how they respond to certain families, the reality is that the issue of having mothers and fathers in the lives of children, or good parents in the lives of children, is an issue all over the world.
Absolutely. If you if you just joined us, we're on Can We Have a Conversation? I am talking with Dr. Johnson. He is the author of The Cornerstone for Responsible Fatherhood. We are launching out across the world, so we are hitting over 150 countries, and there are some fathers that's listening to us. And one thing we learn about this work is it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what race you are, it
Right.
doesn't matter how old you are. We have a crisis, a fatherhood or a fatherless crisis across the world. Wherever there's a
Yes.
father, there's an issue. And
Right.
we want to involve you in this conversation, let you know that if you are a father, you need to be one, consistent, you need to be active, and you need
Yep.
to be present in your children's life. And you're gonna make some mistakes. We
Right.
understand that. But you learn from those mistakes, but you don't give up. You
Right.
because your children didn't ask to come here.
There you
Uh,
go.
you're the parent, and it's your responsibility to, even if you are blocked, there's some barriers to stop you. It's your responsibility to fight for your children. Uh,
Right.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Well, I like to say, I used to say to the father group when I have the opportunity, the attitude we have to our kids is that old song by, Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell, "Ain't no mountain high enough to keep me away from my kids."
That's right. That's right. That's right.
It ain't no mountain,
No,
right?
no. You said something
Yeah.
earlier, and I want to go back to, you said, and that is of the past, but
Mhm.
you'd be surprised how their traditional court systems still believe that a man is not supposed to be a part of their children's life or have custody of their children.
But again, I would say, and I agree with you, and I think Dr. P, what I've found, and it might sound like a broken record, it's the policies. All
It
right.
is the policies. It is.
In legal judges follow legal policies and mandates as well. You know what I mean? It's like when they say that their hands are tied in terms of that interpretation of that particular policy or that particular law, it probably is, and it needs to be changed.
Mhm.
For example, in the work, one of the things I've done over the last few years, really the last decade or so, I've been working with a group called the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, which involve judges and lawyers, and what they're talking about is all aspects of divorce and custody and visitation, whatever. And I hear from them, what their constraints are, and they
Mm.
say it. You know what I mean? It's like, I got to do it this way because this is what it says I'm supposed to do. And a lot of judges, as you well know, are not necessarily mavericks.
Mm.
They may be mavericks to get to judgeship, but when they get there, they kind of become pretty sedentary. You know what I mean? It's,
Mm.
it is, and the thing is that we have enough of us who understand these policies and these laws, to be able to advocate for changes. And the judges will tell you that. They say, hey, advocate for the change. You know what I mean? I can't do it. I'm sitting on the bench. You know what I mean? And so we got to know, what our roles and responsibilities are in order to affect, the policy changes that are necessary. And we're doing it. It's, again, everybody can't see it
Mhm.
because one of the reasons because the work that we do, particularly in terms of the federal and government investment, we're not in every state. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
if the
Mhm.
state chooses not to do it, then it's not there. And then if you don't have private the foundation community came together. It was the Ford Foundation and the Casey Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation from was it Menlo, California, some years ago. All of them came together and they agreed that they would fund the beginning infrastructure for the development of the fatherhood field. They funded groups like mine. They funded programs, they funded efforts to do evaluation. I was a part of the first evaluability study ever done on fatherhood, and it's in 1995. Go look at it. My name is on it, and I was the subject matter expert on that evaluation study to determine whether or not you could evaluate programs. As you know, Dr. P, That was a big conversation in the meeting that we had in Nashville. And basically, what you heard was that you don't need to be evaluating programs with these gold standard measures until they are ready to do it. All right. But see, how the programs do it is that, in a rush to go back to Congress to tell them that we're doing something that has impact, which is most of those fatherhood programs have not done, instead of educating Congress on the pathway to impact, and showing evidence of promise. To show how the work is evolving, and people in Congress will do that, but you got to educate Congress like that. But a lot of the evaluating the groups that we are subject to is that that's where the money is in the fatherhood field. If you ever want to know what the money in the fatherhood field is, it's in the evaluation research. I'm talking about millions of dollars. And one of the unfortunate things for me in looking at this, it's traditionally majority institutions or majority firms getting those resources, and they're not going to HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and they're only going to a small number of folks like you and I. We may get hired, for the initial part of the project, but when the real money starts with the data collection and that type of thing, our consultant contracts are cut, and then we don't get to be a part of these, studies, and get the recognition that we deserve for doing the work. And that was another reason why, I wrote the book, because, anybody in the fatherhood field, I don't care if you work for any of those MDRC, Urban Institute, you work for the government, my name is in somewhere there. All right. And the thing is that, and that it's going to have to be there because I was there, but it's not amplified. All right. And so amplification comes, when just like we try to teach the fathers to be able to speak for themselves, I got to speak for myself. And our cornerstones is an effort to speak out and to say, there's a lot of ways to look at this work. And this is, our story, my co-authors, Uriel Johnson, who's my vice president of research and evaluation, and Herb Turner, who works, who's president of Analytica, who's a evaluation specialist. He's a PhD in psychometrics. He's a PhD in evaluation. That's a hard degree to get, you know what I mean? But that's what he is. And so he understands this. And what we wanted to say is that we want to give you a fisherman's guide. Start off, we're going to talk about programs, talk about the components of these programs, talk about the partnerships, that you need, talk about the importance of domestic violence, you know what I mean? It didn't just show up. There are abusers, but at the same time, there's a way to do that, and we should be sensitive to it. That's a very important ally in our work, to work with women, in that category. And it's also important to understand evaluation and the evaluation traps, because sometimes, Dr. P, if it's a requirement that you go through evaluation that's before you're ready, even though you would like the money, it might be better to walk away from it. Because
that's right.
If you take the money, then you have to go through with it. And then if you're premature, guess what your result's going to be? NULL, null. And so and that gets reported out to the world. And even though you've been working with those fathers, they've been telling you how good you were of it. The evaluation report say null, and then you get labeled as null, and then you can't take the evaluation results that they've made about your program that they've studied over 2 years. You can't use that to leverage anything, because there's nothing in there that talks about really what you did, because what they're looking for the most part in fatherhood is ironic. What they're looking for are the hard things. They're looking for child support payments. They're looking for how many jobs you get. And that, my belief is that while those things are important, the parenting part of these programs is more important than those things, because if you do the parent part right, they'll do those things. But they don't. But you see, but from a workforce development perspective, anybody knows that you got to have a combination of hard skills and soft skills.
That's right.
And the soft skill part in our work is the parenting part.
That's right.
But it's the most significant part. For example, in the gold standard evaluation done of fatherhood programs, it's called Parents Fair Share. Manpower Demonstration Research Corporation. You go to their website, you're going to see Jeff Johnson's name on it. You're going to see NPCL's name on it, because they say anybody who wants to train in fatherhood, our recommendation is that you go to them, because they've been with us along this journey. And so, and what they talk about in their data collection is how the most successful part of the fatherhood intervention itself was the part that involved the curriculum of parents, working with parents. All right, they said that it was participated in by more fathers than any other component. You know what they said, and this is back in 1993. They said that when they set the parenting programs up, for the fathers, over 70% of the fathers participated throughout the project. 70%.
Wow,
right?
That's huge.
Right. But see, that part of it doesn't get the credit, because what they're looking at is whether or not that led to an increase in child support collections, stuff like that. See, the history of demonstrations for fatherhood is ironic. It's also been done in periods of high unemployment, right?
That's right.
And so in periods of high unemployment, where employers can pick and choose, who they want, depending on how the program markets itself, what employer wants to hire somebody who they think is a damaged good?
That's right. That's right.
All right. So that's why we got to really have an understanding of how to, when I work with people on promoting fatherhood, this is Jeff Johnson talking. You don't start with fatherhood. You start with the future of the children. All right. You start there. All right. And most folks buy into that, because people want the best for children in the future. That's the next generation. Right. And then when you talk about the challenges that our children face, it comes right back to what's happening in the home. And then that begins to make our case for fatherhood. All right. Because children do better when they have both parents involved in their lives. Let me explain it in where the ghost can get it. All right. You got 2 eyes. You got 4 eyes. You got 4 ears. You got 4 hands and 4 feet on duty. Right. Looking front, back, behind, whatever. All right. That's the magic. The mother has a vocabulary, the child learns from. The father has a vocabulary that the child learns from. The mother is more secure oriented. The father is more adventurous and outgoing. The mother's covering the child. The father does rough and tumble, throws the baby up in the air, until the mother says, "Don't do that to my baby." But I would say to you that father is showing his love. We care differently, but it has the same. The research says, over 100 studies says, that having a loving and nurturing father is as important as the social, academic, and other successes that a child has, as important as a loving and nurturing mother. Not more than, but just as important. 100 studies, meta-analysis, drop the mic.
No, you know what? And you hitting it on. You guys are hearing, because see, they hear me talk about it all the time. It's like a broken record. I mean, I'm always talking about policies, legislations, father friendly, and I'm never disrespecting the mother, because I know there's a lot of single women that would love to have a man that can help them out.
That's right.
But
that's the value. That's the value.
That's the value. Yeah.
That's the value, because when I talk to moms, about fathers, I said, what is the value and worth of this father, particularly if you ain't with him, you got to pay child support, right? What's the value and worth you put into him being able to make his child support payments on a regular basis, right? All right. And so, in other words, if that's the case, but what I'm saying, and what's, because most of these women, we did focus groups in a recent project I was working on, and most of the women we interviewed indicated that they wanted the fathers involved in the life of their children. By the way, while they're still getting over their hurts for having a relationship that didn't work out, all right, and some other stuff that he might have done, because some fathers, some of us, Dr. P, when I look at us as fathers, I have to say, and be very transparent, we got good, bad, and ugly, right? But that just means that we got some more work to do. All right, because what we have to do is start investing into our boys, early enough, so that they begin to understand, what a decent man, what a decent father is, and so they can grow into that. All right, and so you got both a prevention side and you got an intervention side. But I'm not giving up on any parent, and I'm not giving up on any child, And so I'm staying right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because our children need their parents, and if we can move those parents in a way that helps them reconsider some of the choices that they make and make a decision to be a vital part of their children's lives, let's try to make that happen. But it's only going to work. This is what the judges say. The judges say, don't bring in any divorcing couple talking about custody and visitation if they're not willing to work together on it. That's the same for us, for folks who don't have the money to go to court. When we talk to the parents, it's not going to work unless you are willing, which is an internal piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to what Ballard said. It's the heart. Your heart got to be in this. If your heart is not in this, what I mean, it's going to be very difficult to do. But our job is to show them, that they show them their value, all right,
Mm-hmm.
and as a person, as a human being, and hopefully that begins to develop an attitude that I am valuable, I am important, I can be valuable and important to my kids, and because a lot of mothers and fathers, really don't even understand that about themselves in terms of what they're capable of.
Let me ask you a question though. Okay, because that makes a lot of sense what you said. Because the judges do want them to be able to work together, and they did one time love each other. But what
Right.
happens when you have two parents, and one of the parents is willing to do everything, and the other parent is willing to do nothing? And so, just because one parent says go left, the other parent says no, I'm going right, and you can't get on the same page, and then you go to court and you're not on the same page. What happens? You just be penalized because you can't. I mean, you're only responsible for
See,
yourself.
well, one of the benefits of couples who divorce have that for folks who are not married don't have is access to mediators, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a case by case,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a case by case. But see, my thought is that what we know, if you look at substance abuse prevention programs, the one that work the best are the ones that are residential and they last for over a year. All right. The problem with the court ordered, co-parenting and those type of things, only thing or paternity establishment for that matter, to as a precursor to get visitation access, they ask you to to purchase a 2-hour online video, on co-parenting and access to visitation or paternity, and then bring that back before the court and say that you've done that, and then that becomes the base for the court to say, well, I guess you're ready now. No, you're not, right? We know it takes a long time for a 2-hour video ain't gonna do it. You know what I mean? But see, but at least, excuse me, but at least couples who are married who divorced have that. You know what I mean? Because of the legality of the marriage. All right. Those who never got married, they don't have that. They don't have that access. And so
Now that's true, but
right.
there's another part to that, Dr. Johnson, and that is when you talk about mediation. How many? I mean, have you been to mediation? I'm just asking. I've been to
No, I have
mediation.
not. I understand the mediation process, but I've never had to personally go through mediation.
There's not many. I've been to mediation maybe 5-6 times.
Right.
Never have I seen a male mediator.
See, there you go. There you go. See, that's another because see, these are fields. 80% of all child support people are female. 80% of folks who do social service work like we do. Listen, I've been around long enough to know that when I first started doing fatherhood education training, right, and that was during the early 90s, upper 2000s, everybody who I trained were women because there wasn't no men in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Men did not start coming into what we now call the fatherhood field until the early 2000s.
Mm.
All right, I was there, and I was like an anomaly. You know what I mean? It's like but and I hired some men to work with me. You know what I mean? But most of these programs, and again, it's important to understand the history. The history of community-based fatherhood programs comes out of the health community, maternal child health, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And again, that is work with women and children.
That's
and
right.
The decision made for who that practitioner is a woman saying that a woman needs to be there. All right. So for a lot of programs like Head Start, Healthy Start, and others, diversity hiring to them is not only people of color, but also gender.
That's right. That's right.
right? You know what I mean? Because you got to get more men into it, into the whole thing, and so it's just so important to understand a lot of these dynamics. But again, it follows from the whole history of how these things came together, and again, remember, a lot of these programs came out of the feminist movement. All right,
That's
and it
right.
was an advocacy movement, so that really, so middle class white women wouldn't have to be poor for a long period of time. You know what I mean? Because they were, but you should know, they were never the long-term welfare recipients. All right, but as they should, they said they didn't want to be on it at all. You know what I
That's
mean?
right. That's
And
right.
so that's where it came from. You know what I mean? But there were some who were terminal, and they were terminal because they 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 they, they had children before they even finished high school. They didn't have any work histories or whatever, and they weren't married, and the father had not established legal paternity, and they just they were dependent. You know what I mean? Because they had to raise a child. You know what I mean? And those became your long term welfare recipients. You know what I mean?
It's amazing how they went from one extreme to
Right,
another.
right,
Because
yeah,
like you said, it was the father that, because he was the breadwinner, he was the one that had the child. And I know it wasn't right how with the mother
right,
or the wife, she might have been the house person taking care of the
right,
children
but,
and helping the man become a doctor. Then he gets his
right.
doctor's degree, and then he goes marry a new woman, and
That's
then
right.
he makes all the money and she doesn't have anything.
That's
So
right.
then they say, well, you know what, we can't do that. So they
Right.
went from one extreme all the way.
Exactly. Exactly. But see, here's the difference too. That there's a diversity issue there. That's really never been true for black folk. You know what I
That's
mean?
right.
Because
That's
these were
right.
black folk coming out of slavery. You know what I mean?
That's
We
right.
both were in the field. You over there, and your woman was over there. But it also related to creating family dysfunction, because you could be sold at any time away from your kids, and the fathers were looked at as kind of super studs, making babies all over the place. So you got that, that history, and that was there. I think that we've overcome that cultural problem to some extent. But the point, there's a cultural dynamic, associated with some of these things, because the notion of women not working is not true for black women. All right, black women and black men have always had to work, just try to try to create equity, with the majority of society. All right, and
That's
so
the culture. That's the
that's
culture.
right. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Exactly. You know what I mean? So when you look at these cases, and again, I'm just kind of telling you the honest truth. I'm not talking pin against black against white, whatever. But the child support program, for example, is a middle class program. All right. It is thesis, right? And what's the thesis behind it? The thesis behind child support, when it came into first as part of family courts, it's when the divorce rates began to rise. All right, and so before that time, particularly in the black family, we didn't divorce because we didn't have the money to pay for it. We just deserted. You know what I mean? That goes way back to E. Franklin Frazier and those folks. Talk about desertion, right? I mean, how would you unless you heard that word? All right, but for those families that were married, and the mother was not working, the father was working, when they went to family court to divorce, it's how child support program started. All right, the family court judges began to say that Jeff, you and your wife are divorcing, but you are the one working, and you can leave, but the money that you would spend on support of your child is not leaving. That's what the child support program is. All right, it's based on the economics of who brings the money in the home, but it's based on the premise that you got a job and you bringing money in the home.
That's
all right? And so a lot of our brothers, are not dead beat; they're dead broke.
That's right.
So, what I mean? So to use a system of child support policies that really obfuscates their real income potential, and they impute income and say, well, you're 20 years old. It's an imputation. So you're 20 years old. You should be working. You should be making this amount of money, and that the child support office builds the case, takes it from the judge, and the judge says that you got to even though you weren't there to agree with the financial composition that they made you out to be, you still have to adhere to it because you didn't show up. most of the time, see, most of the guys, but what we try to do in our programming and our training and whatever, we try to teach fathers, practitioners how to teach fathers how to be proactive with child support, as opposed to being reactive, as opposed to being, proactive as opposed to reactive. Because the reality is that, it operates differently in different jurisdictions or whatever, but we've moved child support to a point nationally, and a lot of it comes from some of the work we've done over the years, where a lot of your child support agencies, child enforcement agencies, are taking the word enforcement out of their name and are becoming child support services. And this is supposed to present a customer relations approach. You should also know, Dr. P, that as a result of that, child support began to hire men, right? Even in Oakland, California, the state of California, as what they call community engagement coordinators, all right, to talk to men, all right, because before that it was a woman doing that, all right, and they said that men talk to men, whatever. But the point is that we got to work with both men and women on this issue, and women are allies. You know what I mean? Because most of your fatherhood programs, are extensions of programs working with mothers, which means what? That the boss of that agency is probably who? A man or a woman?
A woman.
A woman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So listen, they can't be your enemy because that's who we got to work with to expand it. All right.
That's right. Yeah.
And women are part of the leadership. There have been any number of women over the years who have been leaders in the fatherhood field. All right. And they know that, and they got to be acknowledged, and we have to give them credit, because this is an all hands on deck. When I said this is not a solo act, that's also true in the context of how we do this work. Because you may have some women administrators who may do a better job than some of us men. But the reality is that we got to work with what we got until we can, make things, look at things from an equity lens, right? We got to move towards that point, because in this field of work, the majority of folks in this work are women, are men. And I don't say that's unfortunately, I just say that that's who it is.
That's what it is.
We got to work together in order to try to advance what we're doing.
One of the things you said, and I know we're over the time, but I told you the time will go fast. I got to have you come back. But one of the things that I want to address is you talked about being proactive. And I remember, working with child support services, and, it was during the time of the recessions when I went through my divorce and just couldn't get a job. I was a general contractor. Banks weren't giving out money. And you wasn't getting any contracts, and so they said, well, you need to start applying for a job. So they gave me a list of things, and I had to come back with dates and times of me applying for jobs. And when I went back, showed up to court, I had all of these people that I called. I had all the dates, the times, the phone numbers, and everything. And the woman said, you know what? I like working with you. I didn't wait for them to call me. I went down there and told them, this is where I am. This is my situation, and they worked with me.
Let me tell you, and that's so important. Let me tell you why. All right. Because most of the guys who owe child support, and I'm not talking about the ones who are evading. I ain't talking about the deadbeats. I'm talking about the dead brokes. All right. What happens, is the child support starts sending you notices, right? To sit down with them to go over this award declaration for you to pay, and it takes, in the average situation, Dr. P, about a year, for those notices to accumulate in such a way that it turns into a warrant, right? And that's when not the Metropolitan Police Department, but the sheriff office comes over. All right. And when guys talk about police coming over to their homes to guys on the street, what they're not telling the guys is that they've been throwing them notices in the drawer for over a year. You know what I mean? Because it's not automatic. It takes a year build up for the warrant to be out there. And we got to say, listen, this is not something that you want to not attend to, because the penalty for doing it is that you could end up in jail and owing money that if you were proactive, you probably would know. There was a law that was passed by the Supreme Court called the Turner versus Rogers. This is in the child support, literature, and it says that since 2005, if a father can demonstrate that he cannot financially pay his child support, he cannot be held in contempt. And the contempt is important because that is the precursor, or the judgment for sending you to jail. But
right.
again, that's a proactive move. You guys, if you broke, you gotta say you broke and prove that you broke. If
That's
you broke,
right.
you cannot be held in contempt, which means you're not going to jail. But see, a guy is not going to get that on the street. He got to come to a program like ours,
That's
in
right.
order to get that information. And that's why these interventions are so important. As I said, education is not experience, but it gives you insight into the experiences of others dealing with this, so that folks will know what their options are. All right. And that's why I say that what we are, Dr. P, we are parent educators. All right. Let's call it what it is. Because you say you're a parent educator, instead of working with dads, you're a parent educator. All right. Because that's a more palatable and something that's easier to understand. Because when you say you work with them, that's kind of, nebulous. Well, what are you doing? When you say parent educator, oh, that's what you're doing. You know what I mean? From just those two words join, parent educator, folks say that's what they're doing. And I think that we're fatherhood parent educators. And when we do that, and we should have standards of practice, something that we really don't have a whole lot of. I'm working towards that. I've been a big proponent of that from the beginning. But I did want to let folks know, if they want to get a copy of the book, they could go to my website, at www.npclfathersandfamilies.org. That's www. N is in Nancy, P is in Paul, C is in Charles, L is in Larry, families, with IES, fathersandfamilies.org. And then you can order off our website, or you can also purchase the book on Amazon. You can also call our office in Washington, D.C. Our phone number is 202-600-7817. That's 202-600-7817. And those are some ways you can get copies of the book. And Dr. P, I'm so glad we were able to get that book to you, and that you can see its value. And we hope over the next year or two that it will have its impact, in giving us a community of learning and knowledge about the fundamental aspects, or the cornerstones of responsible fatherhood programs, planning, implementation, and evaluation.
No, absolutely. I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation. The book has been very useful to me. I've been doing this work for a while, and it's still been beneficial to me. I wish I learned it when I first came into the industry. I've been so far ahead.
That's right. And that's what it's about. It's a fisherman's guide. It's for those who are just starting out. It's for those who've been doing it for a while. It's for the policymakers to understand it, particularly on the evaluation side. Don't enact policies that try to get results too quickly, because you're dealing with the problems that were inherent way back 10, 15 years before the father got to that point. Then you want a program to turn around in 1 year and pay off child support. Look, we got to really educate people on the importance of the work, the need for the work as children, and also the parents. And then we got to make sure that we advocate for the time needed in order to do the work. And because there's no one size fits all approach, and this is not a sprint. In some instances, it's a marathon, but it's worth it, because what we're doing is trying to break the cycle of children following the behaviors of their parents, because they've not known of anything else. And that's why programs like ours are so important, because it is gives them an opportunity to really come together around what's needed to be the best parent they can be under their circumstances.
Well, you've heard it on Can We Have a Conversation? We've been talking with Dr. Johnson, the author of The Cornerstone for Responsible Fatherhood. We're going to come back and have him back on the show a few times, because this is good information. He didn't just talk about fatherhood, but he talked about the historical parts of how we got to where we are, and how we need to change the laws, the policies, the legislations, and how we need to work together to co-parent. These are things that we people of color, we don't do much. But it's because we haven't been exposed to this. Where you're being exposed to this, and I always say, whenever you're being exposed to anything, you're accountable. So now you're accountable to what you know.
There you go.
So again, this is Can We Have a Conversation? I'm your host, Dr. P. Until the next time, God bless you, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Dr. P.
Yes, sir.